In May 1945, American soldiers crawled into a cave in these mountains behind me and uncovered a treasure trove. Over 6,500 paintings, 2,300 drawings and watercolours, and over 1,000 pieces of sculpture and tapestries. From 1939, as the Nazis swept through Europe, they not only destroyed homes and decimated populations, they also plundered cultural property from every territory they occupied. But what else were they after? Why did much of it end up in caves? And how much is still out there waiting to be discovered?
The Nazis were so keen to get their hands on all of Europe's treasures for two reasons. One was because it would establish Germany as the centre of world culture, and two, because individual Nazis wanted to line their own pockets.
It was the largest art theft that the world has ever known. It was taken from all over Europe, and God knows how many pieces of art the Nazis actually accumulated.
The Monuments Men were an international organisation. Their job was to go out into Europe and into Southeast Asia and collect the vast amount of looted treasure, artworks and artefacts.
It's nearly impossible to put a figure on the value of the art, the gold, the relics that the Nazis stole. It has to be in the tens of billions, if not more.
From 1939 to 1945, the deadliest conflict in the history of mankind, the Second World War, raged. But beneath the bombs and amongst the marching armies, another, perhaps often overlooked battle was going on. The fight to stop the Nazis from stealing the cultural treasures of Europe. By 1943, Nazi plundering had risen to such heights that the Allies created a special division to fight back. They were known as the Monuments Men. They consisted of just a few hundred men, and leading it was a group of museum directors, curators and art scholars who were all signed up to military duties. Their job description was simple: to save as much of the culture of Europe as they could during combat.
The Nazis were so obsessed to gather Europe's treasures and relics for several reasons. One, national pride. Two, they wanted to demonstrate that they uniquely had ancient Aryan origins and they were worthy of these relics, and only they alone. And third, it was residual wealth to fund their ever-increasing war booty.
So the Monuments Men were formed into a platoon and basically put in the front line to get to the artworks and the monuments as quickly as possible to stop them being destroyed by the Nazis or hidden away at the bottom of a lake or an assault mine or whatever. So incredibly brave, very knowledgeable people who did manage to recover a lot of artwork.
They were experts in art and sculpture and artifacts, but also they were preservers. They had techniques for preserving the artwork that they found.
They had a list of all the treasures and the art and the relics and the rest of it that had been plundered from various cultural centres like the Louvre and other museums, and they wanted to go and grab it back from the Nazis, and they did this actually before the end of the war. Europe was still one giant battlefield, but they felt about it so strongly that they wanted to go out and risk life and limb to get back these treasures which the Nazis had taken with no compunction whatsoever.
Once the war was over, the extent to which the Nazis had pillaged Europe's treasures became clear. The big question was, where had they stashed it? And so the Monuments Men were given a new task: to find it. The quest for answers took them to the Austrian Alps, and deep inside the Altausee salt mines, the Monuments men hit the jackpot. They discovered that this series of mines stretching some 60 kilometers inside the mountain was used by the Nazis to store some of their most precious stolen art. Its location is remote and hard to reach, but I'm meeting local mountain guide Mark Unterberger to help unravel the secrets of the mines. Oh, wow. It's a pretty good hiding place.
Yeah, sure.
So what did the Monuments men find down here?
So they find the most, or one of the biggest art collections during the Second World War. During this time, they hide here in the mountain over 7,000 pieces of paintings, sculptures, documents, gold a little bit, and also other stuff.
So that's an enormous collection.
Yeah, sure.
Do we know what the value was?
You can't count it, because until today, if you say what's the price of the Madonna, you don't have any ideas.
And what kind of artists are we talking about? I mean, they were.
So we have all the big old artists like Rubens, Michelangelo, Van Gogh, Rembrandt, Van Eyck. Also the biggest or the importantest, what they find in here, the Ghenter altar.
When they set out to see what they could find, they were shocked at the hordes of fine art, of gold, of silver, of stash of the Nazis of one kind or another. And they were quite horrified because it gave them an inkling as to the magnitude of what had just gone on. They had no idea it was a huge movement, and most of the museums of Europe had been depleted.
Going ever deeper into the labyrinth of tunnels, we were heading towards a cave known as Springerwerk, one of the locations of the stolen art. Which way are we going? This way?
We're going this way straight.
Okay.
So now, 700 meters deep in the mountain, we're getting to one of the 8 storage rooms, the so-called Springerwerk. You can already see the wood constructions.
Yeah.
And they begin to build everything here in the mountain in summer 43, and in the winter 43 the first paintings get here in the mountain.
Right, okay. So this is the room where the pictures and the
exactly.
artworks
It's not
would have been
only
stored.
this room, what you see in front of you, it's this big chamber we're standing right now.
Oh yeah, wow, look at this.
And to build everything in the mountain, they need over 1,200 cubic meters of wood.
Right, to secure the tunnels. And what is it? What's this? Vorsicht? My German's not so good.
You see it, Vorsicht, Marmor nicht stürzen, what means attention, marble, don't drop. Because if we open the box, we can see why we should don't drop it.
What is it?
This is a bomb which was dropped over Linz during the Second World War and which not exploded. And the Gauleiter decided to blow all the art in the mountain during the last days of the war up, so that everything was destroyed.
So this is an unexploded bomb?
Exactly.
Fine. And the reason why they had bombs here was because if the Allies had discovered the artworks, they were going to blow everything up.
Exactly. So before they can discover it, the Nazis decided if the Third Reich goes away, it goes away with all the values and also with the art.
Right. So if the Nazis weren't going to have it, no one was going to have it.
Exactly.
Okay. We'll put this down very gently. Yeah.
The Monuments men worked very closely with intelligence teams and divisions, and they were able to talk to local people, displaced persons, and uncover a huge amount of information about what had been hidden where, because it takes a lot of manpower to move that amount of material into mines, seal it up, build the necessary fortifications around it, and people talked about this. So in some instances, the Monuments men found this information just by talking to locals.
So now this is the place where all the art was carried away. And you can see now only the empty boxes.
So this very room would have housed artworks from old masters,
Exactly, like
Vermeer,
the
Rembrandt.
big names we know we have here in this storage room.
So this would have been, at the time, the most important art collection in the world.
Exactly. You can say until this time it's the treasury of the world.
When it comes to valuing these things, obviously, if they ever were to come on the open market, we're talking about millions and
Yeah.
millions and millions of pounds,
Sure.
all stored in a mine under the mountain.
People watching this program will think, well, what a ridiculous place to put valuable works of art in a salt mine, dripping with water, damp, awful conditions. But basically, you go into the salt mine where these works of art were stored, and you've got perfect conditions. It's perfectly dry. The conditions are for some reason, better than the basements of the Tate or anywhere else. And when you actually look at the wood, it's as if I'd sort of knocked the nails in last week and created these frames. It was perfect, and that's why they stored all their works of art there.
Hitler's plan to keep all these classic works of art preserved in such excellent condition eventually worked to the benefit of the Monuments Men, and much of what was recovered can now be found in museums across the world. But it wasn't just paintings stashed in chambers like this one. The Nazis had stored lots of stolen property in these mines, from sculptures to coin collections, and even gold.
It's a little bit like the scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark when they discover where all the hidden artworks were held. This was it. This was
Now
literally
we're
the place.
right now of the pictures or the movies you see. Here is where the past happens.
And what would you say was the most famous work of art that was kept down here?
There are a lot of famous arts here in the mountain, but one of the importance for not only for the mine was the from Michelangelo, the Madonna, and also the Ghent altar. So you can say these two are what the most know.
Was any of it damaged, or was it all kept in pretty good
The
nick?
most what's here in the mountain was just well preserved because of the conditions. They don't found everything here in the mountain, so not 100%. Just a tiny pieces or a tiny part of the art get lost, but they don't know it if by the transport here to the mine, in the mine, or as the soldiers, the Americans, take it away back to the owner.
So you're saying that there's a possibility that there could still be treasure down here?
The one or other say maybe in the mine is still a piece of art. So, and if you find this, yeah, you know what this means.
What, you can keep it.
I don't know it.
Right.
If I find something, yeah, I'm not standing here.
Right, yeah, we should start looking, right?
The Monuments Men were incredibly successful in what they discovered in the Altausee mine in Austria, but also in other hiding places like the Merkers mine in Germany itself. Their efforts after the end of the Second World War led to more than 5 million works of art being saved, including paintings by Van Eyck, Michelangelo, Rembrandt, and even Da Vinci's Mona Lisa and The Last Supper. But despite their monumental efforts, a huge amount of artworks are still missing, and so the search continues to this day. Remarkably, there's even a possibility that some of the stolen Nazi treasure remains hidden in the Altausee mine itself or the surrounding locality. Few people know the history of the area better than local historian Hans Fuchs.
Hi, Hans. Jamie, hello.
How are you?
Hello. Come in. Thank you.
Hello. Oui.
Thanks for agreeing to
Hello.
meet me.
Hello.
So I just had a fascinating look around the mine.
You was in the mine.
It's amazing.
It was great for you.
Yeah. What have you got to show
Jamie,
me?
I have a map for you. You can see we are here now, Steinberg House. Yes, you can see Steinberg House.
Yeah.
And here you go inside, and you was here in Springerwerk.
Yes. So this is where I explored here,
Yes.
where this is where the paintings
Was the
and the artwork
paintings?
was
Yes. But there are many other spots in the salt mine. Yes, here,
Yeah.
here, here.
So can I go and see these other places?
and you
as well?
can go inside here because it's very dangerous. Yes.
Right.
The stone's broken down and it's
So the mine has collapsed there.
the mine is collapsed here. Yeah, but this was a small room. Yes, what you see,
yeah.
much more bigger
Really?
deposit spots, and all was full with artwork.
Really?
Yes.
The vast amount of stolen art discovered by the Monuments Men in the Altausee salt mine is just one part of a network of locations throughout Europe that held the Nazis' stolen treasures.
You must imagine I have brought you a list, yes, a list from the Nazis, and the Monument Men make a file
Right.
from Washington National Archive, and you can see how much buildings, sculptures, coins
Wow,
was inside.
So this is
Yes.
declassified
Yes, yes,
documents,
yes.
and forgive my German's not very good. So what is it telling us here? This is mosaics.
Okay, you can see 6,500 paintings, aquarels, graphics,
Aquarels, but this is watercolors.
watercolored, yes, yes.
So this is an extraordinary amount.
But here, you must hear 1,200 paquete, yeah, boxes. And nobody knows what was in the boxes, yes?
Wow, so these were like the crates that I saw,
Yes,
the big wooden
yes,
crates.
Yes, yes.
Is it possible that there could be some other paintings or artwork hidden still in the mine?
Maybe, but I cannot say it. Maybe.
Sure.
The Monuments Men were incredibly successful. I think they were surprised by their own success. We have photographs of them standing by, classic works of art, standing by, gold bullion stacked as tall as they are, jars full of gold teeth that presumably were taken from Holocaust victims. I mean, shockwaves went through the Allies when they realized just the extent of how the Nazis had pillaged everything in Europe.
They found all these fabulous works of art. That's one thing, but then they suddenly come across bags and boxes that are absolutely crammed full of gold fillings from people's teeth and thousands of gold wedding rings stored in the salt mines.
But it wasn't just art that Hitler was after. In this museum here in front of me lies an altogether different artifact that the Nazis took.
The Hofburg Palace in Vienna was used by the Nazis to store looted art, but it also held treasures of its own. Hitler wanted to build his Third Reich on strong cultural foundations from the past, and so the Nazis also hunted for relics, something Heinrich Himmler knew a lot about. And one object in particular captured their attention.
And this is that object. Now back here in Vienna, it's called the Spear of Destiny, or the Holy Lance, and it's said to have pierced the side of Christ himself at the time of the crucifixion. Now, embedded within it, supposedly, is one of the nails that attached Jesus to the cross, which, if you think about it, is an odd thing for an atheist like Adolf Hitler to be interested in.
It's hard to really separate what Hitler was trying to acquire from what Himmler was trying to acquire, but I think we could safely say Hitler wanted the fine art, the masterpieces of the classical world. Himmler wanted the relics. He wanted the Holy Grail. He wanted the crystal skulls. He wanted things that would prove Germany's Aryan roots. And together, it was a quite formidable combination.
They were both very motivated by this idea of the Aryan super race and the history of Aryanism and Ariosophy. And for them, this was more than just a political mantra. This was something that was almost spiritual in its veneration of the Germanicness and the Germanic race. But Himmler had this crackpot occult side to him as well, that Hitler gave him free rein to indulge.
Dr. Franz Kirchweger is a curator at the Hofburg Palace and can shed some light on why Hitler and the Nazis were so interested in the lance.
Does the lance you have in the museum actually date from the time of the crucifixion? And could it have been used to pierce the side of Christ?
It's incredibly difficult to give a definite answer about relics in any sense and everywhere, whether they are real coming from the time of Christ and whether they have been used during the Passion of Christ. As far as the lens is concerned, the spear is concerned, we definitely know that the way it looks like is from a different age than from Christ, Jesus Christ. It comes from the Carolingian time, that means late 8th century. Even if we have something within the Holy Lance, which is in the middle, which was understood as to come from the crucifixion of Christ as one of the holy nails, even if we could find any way to prove it comes from the time of Jesus Christ, we will probably never know if it was really used for this very specific moment that makes it a relic. So for us, it's difficult how to deal with belief and the knowledge. There is so much in between that makes it uncertain and unclear whether that's really the real relic.
Himmler was very centered upon the idea of relics and of charging magically objects. He had the idea that he could surround his SS officers in a room for a ritual with alleged relics or certainly objects of symbolic value that somehow would set off into the room magical vibes that they could pick up on and that would fuel their souls in what might be termed evil.
Himmler has his kind of Nazi Camelot at Wewelsburg Castle, a residence that he bought before the war. He even had an Arthurian round table there, and he wanted to bring to Wewelsburg the treasures from the Passion of Christ. So he wanted the crown of thorns, he wanted the Holy Grail, he wanted the Holy Lance, and he did manage to get some of those things to Wewelsburg in the hope that he could turn it into this SS capital city and that he would be the Nazi King Arthur and that the mystical power would help them to win the war.
It's okay for us to have people who want to believe these stories and the ones that say, no, we don't have this specific proof. And I can tell you, especially as far as the lens is concerned, we are still in a process among scholars to find out whether there is a chance that small parts maybe of a former Holy Lance or of a former Holy Nail was integrated, was forced into the lance. So there are options that we can say for sure, no, that's definitely not true, or we can say it's definitely true. So there is still a way of, even for the ones who want to believe, to do so.
It's not easy to get inside the head of Himmler, but when you do, you realize his quest for these ancient relics, whether it be the Spear of Destiny or the Holy Grail or others, was not just for a trophy. Somehow he felt that these objects were talisman for the Nazis to become the most prestigious power the planet has ever known. And that's what the quest was for. The quest was for power through ancient relics.
Although Hitler may not have been quite so obsessed with relics, he certainly had a passion for art, which originated from his youth.
The young Adolf Hitler famously failed to gain entrance to the Vienna Art Academy here behind me. Apparently he was very good at drawing buildings, less so people. But that didn't stop him from believing himself to be an art connoisseur. And so once he'd come to power back in 1933, almost immediately, his artistic preferences became law.
Nowhere was this more apparent than in the art festivals which took place in Munich from 1937. The Great German Art Exhibition was a grand display of works that Hitler approved of, from idealized soldiers and landscapes to German women. A few streets away, the Degenerate Art Exhibition did the opposite. Here, people were invited to come and laugh at modern abstract art, art that Hitler didn't like.
He wanted the good stuff, as he called it. He wanted the old masters, the very valuable stuff, and so he wanted it from everywhere that he took over, Czechoslovakia, Poland, France. He wanted all of the masters. He wanted them over into Germany so he could have them, so he could own them. But the other stuff, the degenerative art, that had to be destroyed. But then, of course, they realized that actually there was money in it, or, of course, it could be sold. A lot of it was destroyed, a lot of it was sold.
The big question, of course, is where did all this art come from? The answer? It was taken from Germany's art galleries and museums and stolen from its people. In 1938, Austria was incorporated into the Reich, and more art became available to the regime, and the Nazis took it.
It was the Reichsleiter Rosenberg Institute that was set up basically to coordinate bringing of all the works of art from all around Europe to Germany.
As the Nazis moved into one country after another, they basically carry out the mass looting of museums, of libraries. They went for extraordinary things like church bells. They took all the stained glass out of Strasbourg Cathedral and shipped it off. And some of these museums, the Louvre, for example, desperately tried to hide their artworks before the Nazis arrived. And the Nazis would have people go out to find it and bring it back into Germany.
There was one artwork that Hitler was especially keen to get his hands on. The art of painting by the Dutch painter Vermeer. But he faced a problem. It couldn't simply be taken. And so he had to resort to more legal means, and in November 1940, he acquired it through his agent. Something that art expert Konrad Kramer is very familiar with.
And this is it, the famous Vermeer.
It is.
It's a beautiful painting.
It is. And it's in a very small room, after all, interestingly. I mean, they could have placed it in one of the big halls, but still, like, that's the place where it is.
So it's fair to say that this was one of Hitler's favorite paintings.
Well, even more than that, it was his favorite painting. And he was so obsessed by it from its young days that he wrote about it, talked about it, and when the time came, he found out he couldn't loot it. Normally, he would ruthlessly have them all looted, especially here in Vienna from the Jewish families. But as it was, this picture here wasn't in the possession of a Jewish family. It was a wealthy, very high-ranking Austrian noble family, the Czernins, and the Czernins were, to be quite frank, very hard to put under pressure because they were wealthy, they were rich, they were powerful. So it was kind of difficult to have them sell this painting.
Do we know how much he paid for it?
Well, in today's money, it would be about 5 million euro, you could say.
So this was in Hitler's own private collection?
Well, it ended up, as we all know, in Altausee in the mine. It was planned to go and be one of the most prominent pieces in his Fuhrer Museum.
But the Vermeer painting was a notable exception. As the war raged and Hitler's armies swept across Europe, countries like Poland, France and Belgium had their art stolen.
The Nazis plundered the galleries and private collections of Europe on an unprecedented scale. And by the end of the war, millions of pieces of art, from paintings to sculptures, were stolen. Some made their way into the private hands of the Nazi leadership, but most of it was destined for Hitler's Fuhrer Museum in Linz.
So, of course, the Nazis were taking artworks that had been owned by Jewish people, and clearly the owners had been carted off to concentration camps, so they could simply take that artwork. But also, they went after art they knew was there. After all, a lot of this art was catalogued, they knew it existed, so they would go after that artwork ruthlessly, interrogating people, breaking into museums, breaking into private residences, breaking into private libraries, and ransacking them.
The Nazis collected so much art and so many relics, you have to ask, what were they intending to do with it all? Well, of course we know that Hitler was planning his own museum in his hometown that was going to display a lot of it, a lot of the classical art. Then you have Wewelsburg, where you can be assured that the most sacred relics would have been on display for only the Nazi elite, not the general public. Things like the Holy Grail, they would have gone there. And then the coffers of Himmler and Gore and all the other Nazi elite, they would take some for themselves, certainly. And they would probably keep some hidden because it's a source of wealth that they would need to fuel the Third Reich into the future.
Just give me an idea of how important the Fuhrer Museum was to Adolf Hitler.
I would say he followed this plan since he was young, since he was a young man, and he followed this plan until the end. If you look at the Fuhrer bunker in Berlin, in the spring of 45, days before Hitler died, he spent most of the time staring at the model of the Fuhrer Museum, still dreaming of this place which he wanted to have and which he thought would be somehow the thing he would leave for world history.
So it was going to be his legacy. Do you think it would be fair to say that the Fuhrer Museum was singly the most important thing that Adolf Hitler wanted to create?
Well, Linz, his mother town, and the way it should look as a capital city was always in the focus of his plans, and in the center of Linz as the Führer's city was the Fuhrer Museum.
This extraordinary city would be laid out in a very impressive way, which would, of course, all serve to point to their dominance in the world, and also the fact that they were new Roman emperors. They were emperors of the world.
On the 7th of May, 1945, Germany surrendered and the war in Europe was over. But as the victorious Allies celebrated, a big question remained. What had happened to all the cultural property that the Nazis had stolen? And so the Monuments men were given a new task: to find it.
Come the end of the war, the Nazis realized it's not going to end the way they wanted. So they're taking these artworks and this gold and these relics and putting them in the nearest caves or the underground railway stations, or even as they're retreating through Italy, they're taking relics and paintings out of museums as they go, almost desperately. It's now all about preservation and saving it to fight for another day.
Towards the end of the war, it was clear that all this art and all this wealth couldn't stay in Berlin, where it would be discovered. So it was shipped out of Berlin. It was shipped out on trucks and buried in salt mines around Germany, presumably with the intention that either it would be there to be recovered if the Germans won the war, or it would be kept away from the Allies if the Germans lost the war.
It's now over 70 years since the end of the Second World War, and you might think that all hope of recovering these treasures is lost. but artworks still continue to be found. In 2011, a vast collection of artwork worth some £830 million was discovered in a Munich flat. This was the home of Cornelius Gurlitt, the son of Hildebrand Gurlitt, one of the most important art dealers of the Third Reich.
80-year-old Cornelius Gurlitt recalls helping his father save works from wartime Dresden, dismissing suggestions he might return some of the 1,406 paintings and drawings to survivors of Nazi persecution.
I've arranged to speak with author and journalist Stefan Kolderhoff to find out more about how Gurlitt's collection came to light.
So, Stefan, can you tell me what Hildebrand Gurlitt's role was during the war?
Hildebrand Gurlitt was one of the main art dealers who was working for Hitler in two ways. One way was that in 1937, 1938, the Nazis withdrew many works of art from German museums, and they were to be sold, not to be destroyed, but to be sold to raise money for the war. And Hildebrand Gurlitt was one of the 4 art dealers who had to sell thousands of works of art to art dealers in foreign countries. But the second thing was that Hitler was also planning to found a big museum, bigger than the Louvre in Paris or any other museum in the world. And for that, he needed works of art as well. So when the Nazis invaded countries like France or the Netherlands or Belgium or Poland, also there Hildebrand Gurlitt was active to steal or blackmail or also to buy works of art for that planned museum to be built in Linz today in Austria.
And were all the paintings recovered at the end of the war?
No, there are still very many families, mainly Jewish families, who are still in search for what once belonged to them. Many, many works never appeared again, either on the market or in private collections. Of course, some of them may have been destroyed during the war or after the war, or having been looted by other people. But no, I think at least half of those works have come to light after the war.
In 2010, Cornelius Gurlitt was found with €9,000 in his wallet. He wasn't married, he didn't have a pension, he didn't have a job, so there was a huge tax investigation done. And they raided his apartment in Munich, and they found something like 1,600 works of art stored in his apartment. And a lot of them had been stolen by the Nazis from Jews and from different art foundations around Europe.
Obviously, there's just still so much out there that has not been returned. There are presumably hundreds, if not thousands, of private collections that have stolen artworks in them.
And what of all the gold that the Nazis took? Part of the Nazis' hoard was found in locations such as the Merkers mine in Germany, while some of it disappeared into European banks. But much of it is still missing.
The monuments men were immensely successful in financial terms. In just one example, the Merkers mine, which is just northwest of Frankfurt, they found $520 million worth of gold and currency, which in today's money is over $7 billion.
Legend has it that a Nazi train lies buried somewhere containing a vast quantity of gold. Its whereabouts remains one of the greatest questions of the Second World War. In Poland a few years ago, it appeared that it may have been finally found. It was an event that sparked global interest.
2 men, a German and a Pole, have set off something of a gold rush in the woods of Poland. They claim they've discovered a Nazi train loaded with treasures from the closing days of World War II.
One of the great legends of Nazi gold is the Nazi gold train that was supposedly driven into a Nazi complex in what is now modern-day Poland. And it's supposed to have an incredible hoard of gold.
We do know that the Nazis were moving a lot of gold around at the end of the war, obviously as they were losing parts of their empire. And this train was taken into a burrowed-out tunnel in the Al Mountains in Poland. And of course, people have been very keen to find this and other gold that the Nazis hid towards the end of the war. Now, in 2016, there were some excavations carried out because radar did indicate that there was a train-like object within the mountain. It was found to be a kind of a geological quirk as a strange rock formation. But that said, that doesn't mean it's not there, and I think it's pretty certain that we're going to turn up some more Nazi gold, as periodically does turn up.
The Nazi train buried in a hillside in Poland turned out to be wishful thinking. If it did indeed exist, it is still out there, somewhere. Out there with millions of pieces of art which are yet to be recovered. Works by the likes of Raphael, Van Gogh, Rubens, and Canaletto. Even the Amber Room from Russia, once dubbed the eighth wonder of the world.
The Nazis destroyed a lot. They used flamethrowers to destroy stuff. In other words, if we can't have it, you can't have it back. There is stuff to be found. German soldiers would have stolen stuff. The locals would have probably known where the stuff was in the mines and would have taken stuff as well. Even down to Cornelius Görlitz, they actually found in a suitcase that he got in the hospital a Monet.
We have no way of knowing how much is still out there in private collections. We have actually no way of knowing, if we're very honest, whether it was the Nazis who took all of the stuff in the first place, because, you know, as is the way with large armies, they will tend to pick up the odd thing as they move through, and so perhaps the Allies had some of it. The thing is that the records, such as they are, probably aren't all the records, or are selective in what they choose to record.
But it's important to appreciate just how successful the Monument's men were. During and beyond the war, they tracked, located and returned more than 5 million artistic and cultural items stolen by Hitler and the Nazis. Their role in preserving cultural treasures is without precedent.
The story of Nazi art and Nazi loot is by no means over. There's an immense amount that still hasn't yet been recovered, either secreted in places one simply doesn't know where, or still lost in the financial system.
It's really difficult to say how much of the Nazi loot, the treasures, the gold, the relics, has been reclaimed and how much of it remains. Now, say it's 50% has been recovered. That means some of the most incredible works of art, some of the most incredible hoards of gold and silver, and some of the arguably potentially greatest relics of antiquity are lying there in a cave somewhere, sitting in a no longer used rail station or high up in a mountain somewhere. I think over time, we'll find some of this, but just how much is there and what's there, that remains a mystery.
Nazi Germany's legacy can be seen in the scars on the landscape, the graveyards scattered in every city, town and village in the world, and perhaps, I guess more subtly, in the gaps in the art galleries of Europe, where once hung the greatest paintings in history. The theft of art was a cultural crime the likes the world had never seen, but hopefully more and more will be recovered so that generations can enjoy them once again. I'll see you next time.